Everybody, thanks for joining me. Happy Friday, happy month of May. That is, here we are. We are now 6 weeks into this very strange and confusing and stressful time, but glad to see you all joining me here and good to have you along on the call. Today, I'll just go over quickly the stats that we shared about the response we got to our email to the tenants a couple of weeks ago. We have doubled the number of tenants who are asking for some sort of rent deferment, and we are working closely with them, telling them, please make sure that you keep in touch with us. Let us know what we can expect so that we can make sure we can pay our bills, and letting them know that we want them to only make commitments that they feel comfortable being able to keep. So don't make a commitment to pay more of the rent than you're going to be able to comfortably pay, and then still be able to pay for your food and medicine and all the rest of the things that are more important for your specific daily needs. We'll figure this all out as we go along. We are up to, I think, 23 of our commercial tenants, 23 of 30 commercial tenants who are unable to pay any portion of the rent. And so we are, moving along as constructively as we can in that circumstance as well. We certainly don't want to start forcing commercial tenants out of our buildings at this very uncertain time. We want those places occupied. It'll be interesting to see how the retail market in particular responds to all of this in the next few months and throughout the next year, because we already had a lot of trouble with filling retail spaces throughout town, and this is just going to make all of that so much worse. It'll also be interesting to see what we end up with regard to our wonderful vacancy tax on vacant storefronts that was passed just the first part of March, right before all this hit. That was certainly passed under circumstances that were assuming that the prosperity would continue, and now it doesn't look like we're in quite the same rosy situation. So we will see what happens. Nicholas, I see you've raised your hand. What can I do for you?
AJ, how many of your clients have applied for the PPP loans, and how many have actually gotten them?
I have not heard anybody get one of those PPP loans except for me. I got one that was funded a week ago, and the reason why mine was funded and everybody else's weren't is because I think everybody else was with very large banks, and I am working with First Republic, and they, I'm a bigger fish in their smaller pond, and they really care about me, and they brought my application through as a courtesy, and I have a really good personal banker, and so I've gone out of my way. I've asked every one of my retail tenants about whether they've had any success, and everybody has said, these programs were exhausted of funds by the time I got through, and the paperwork was a mess, and the night it was difficult to get everything together, and so I'm recommending them to my banker. Unfortunately, even with First Republic, they're not able to really help people who aren't already their clients. So I started this process of switching my banking relationship from Bank of America, where every time I walked into a branch, I got treated like I was dirt on the bottom of somebody's shoe, to a relationship where I have somebody I can call all the time, who's always there, and who can capably, competently, quickly help me with what I need. And it's been a great transition. So unfortunately, I can't really help anybody with that, but I also haven't heard anybody else who's gotten one. Now, I've certainly read the articles where they've talked about, big employers who've gotten those bailouts, Shake Shack and Ruth's Chris Steakhouse. They got $20 million, and I've heard that they're giving the money back. But my general impression of this is that it's been rushed, and it hasn't been very effective, unfortunately. So yeah, that's yes.
JJ, I too am with First Republic, and I too got a PPP loan.
That's exactly. That's good to hear. I'm glad to hear that they're taking good care of us as their clients, and
Yes.
It certainly makes me feel good knowing that they're there for us in these difficult times. I was just reading an article on Curbed that they sent out in their daily newsletter through their Los Angeles site, talking about how, you know, landlords are looking to get relief too. And, you know, a small landlord in Los Angeles talking about, hey, you know, the talk of a rent strike and the talk of making landlords cancel the rent is basically making landlords be the bank. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm not a bank. I'm not big enough to be considered a bank. You know, the rest of, you know, most of my clients are in the boat of small business people who have invested in real estate and do a good job of taking care of their buildings and want to take care of their tenants. But we're not in a position to, you know, to forgive rent. We can certainly give time. We can certainly restructure the terms of the agreement. But, you know, the landlord is a provider of a valuable service. If you don't buy a house, you have to rent one, because otherwise you have to go live in government housing. You know, that's kind of your other option, or being homeless. So if you would like to continue to rent, you know, housing from a private rental home provider, then go for it. Now, if you're talking about a tenant in a very, very large, you know, real estate investment trust property, that might be a different story. But, you know, as far as most of us are concerned, this is, you know, we're normal people just like our tenants are. And this is a business, and we support the livelihoods of all of our vendors and everybody else that provides services to our buildings. And the system works pretty well. And I don't think this is necessarily a good direction for us to go in, which that question actually leads to one of the topics I wanted to discuss today, which was a form letter coming from tenants that we've now seen. John sent it to me today, and we've seen it twice. We're not sure where it comes from, but it basically seems to be the tenant urging the landlord to try to make a deal to forgive some sort of rent in exchange for receiving partial payment now, instead of receiving nothing at the current time, which I suppose is an interesting tactic, except that I don't know about you, but I'd rather have all of the money guaranteed later or get my apartment back than jump to make some sort of a deal and give money away now in order to get a partial payment now. My feeling is it's probably better to wait until we get through most of this. It seems like we're probably heading toward June 1st as a time when we might be able to start going back to normal. And that means that 6 months after that would be December, January, we start actually thinking about collecting rent. Let me put Denise on now and have her tell us a little bit about this concept and about the mayor's 12th supplement to the declaration of the emergency, so that we can have her fill us in a little bit more about what that means for all of us. Denise, are you ready?
I am.
Excellent.
So,
Tell us about it.
So on April 29th, I believe, unfortunately, I have a copy that's not actually dated. I believe it was 29th. The mayor issued 12th supplement to mayoral proclamation from February. And essentially what this does is extend the moratorium through the end of May at the very minimum, but also indicates that so long as the order is in operation, and we're assuming that it's going to end May 31st. It may not, but let's assume it ends May 31st just for sake of our discussion. The mayor's supplement gives 6 months from the date, 6 months for a tenant to pay rent from the date of the termination of the order. So assuming it's May 31st, that means they have through December to pay back monies from April and May. That's the current situation. It also indicates that there is no obligation for the tenant to kill themselves giving us documentation to confirm that it's a COVID-related inability to pay rent. They are to use all due appropriateness, but sometimes they can't get proof because of their work circumstances. There is no employer anymore to obtain the necessary documentation to confirm it. So the mayor's order also indicates that that's not a requirement in order for the rent to be deferred. It also indicates that under no circumstances can you proceed to unlawful detainer. And interestingly, there was a judicial council order from San Francisco County, the San Francisco Superior Court, and it's dated last night. I got it last night at about 6:30, indicating that we're not going to be able to actually get back into court until June 19th. There is currently a total holiday. So every single process of San Francisco County courts is on hiatus through June. And then for us, which is the real housing court, it's back into the saddle on June 19th. So what that means is that you can proceed to terminate for things that pertain to violence or health safety issues, nuisance, creating a public health nuisance, if there's a fire, that sort of thing. But we're not going to be able to get back into court until June 19th. And then even then, everything is going to be pushed out, because you can imagine it's going to be, the floodgates will open. And so everything is going to happen. So that's the Judicial Council. That's our ability to effectuate and enforce the UDs. The 12th supplement, the mayor's order, indicates that you may not abrogate her order for the purposes of a lawsuit. That does not negate our ability to make a deal with the tenants if you need to secure their commitment to pay the rent. It also indicates the mayor's order, the 12th supplement, also indicates that it can be used as a total and complete defense to unlawful detainer action that is filed in violation of the processes of the order. So long story short, just like JJ just said, we need to work with our residential tenants. Our residential tenants need assistance in rent deference. It's not forgiveness. The 12th supplement clearly indicates too that it is absolutely not rent forgiveness, nor is it a restatement of current rent if you take less than the amount on the face of the lease or the current rent. The tenant is supposed to pay $2,000 a month and they can only pay $1,000 a month for the next couple months. That does not mean you've reset the rent. That's also in the order. So it gives more process, and it also confirms some of our landlord bar situation and questions about how does this actually work. She's pretty much clarified it. I think you remember probably reading in the Chronicle and elsewhere, hearing about it, Dean Preston was presenting something to the Board of Supervisors, creating this exact situation, which is let's give a rent freeze for 2 months and not have anybody have to pay rent. So basically what the mayor did with a stroke of her pen is created the order that the Board of Supervisors never got to hear. It went to committee. I shouldn't say that. The Board of Supervisors sent it to committee and the mayor made it happen. So that's where we are. We've got 2 months now. They have till the end of the year to pay the rent. It's not forgiveness, it's deferral. The only thing and now I'm gonna go back to JJ and what's happened with, he's gotten a couple of tenants indicating that they'd like to have a rent forgiveness in exchange for paying some of the rent. That may be the assembly bill that's being kicked around in Sacramento regarding the program that allows owners to avail themselves of the program. They'll get 80% of the rent paid if they forgive 20%. That may be some sort of hybrid, JJ, that's all I can think. But that has not become law. And I actually don't know where they are in the process of having it heard by the full assembly. I also have an update now on commercial evictions that I don't know if you want to hear that now or do you want to just talk about the residential?
Sure. No. Commercial evictions are interesting too.
So commercial evictions, it does not. You may not terminate for rent, inability to pay rent. That's currently being discussed in Senate Bill 939, and that's going to have a moratorium for 60 days. It's going to be heard in early June. It is expected to be voted on by the full Senate in June, and if the Senate passes the bill, it will be probably made law in early August. So that will mean if there's no payment of rent for a particular period of time, you may not evict for that. I don't have the details for that because it's taking so long to get to the Senate. It's not on an emergency order basis. And that may have to do with if they can't pay rent for March, April, May, or something of that nature, you may not evict them for that. You're going to have to make a rent forbearance agreement.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. This 80/20 forgiveness deal, that is the state stepping in to pay 80% of the rent. Is that what that?
Correct. 80% of a tenant, 80% of a landlord's rent in exchange for the landlord forgiving 20% of the rent due. And that's for a particular period of time. And I don't have the specifics on that, but I'm happy to provide that to you. And you may want to post it on your website, but that's being bandied about.
That is an interesting concept, though I'm not sure how they could possibly guarantee or make certain that they're going to have enough money to run that program.
That's exactly what I think they're finding. I think that they're realizing that it may be prohibitively expensive.
Right. I mean, it's going to be even worse than that paycheck protection, program loan system where who in the world is going to be able to, make sure that that program has enough money to keep running? And, I could definitely see us in San Francisco being left out in the cold, well, your rents are so high, we can't afford to pay even 80% of those rents.
Right. That's right.
So that could be an issue. Well,
right.
Here we are, it's the first of the month, and we are going to end up looking for more data. We're just starting to collect rent for May. And next week I will have more information by Wednesday for everybody. So I'll be able to give you more details, and then I'm going to have a press release that we're going to be sending to our friends at the Chronicle and sharing about how the issue is developing over time. So I'll be ready to share that with you next week. Happy to take any questions from anybody who's on the call who has any ideas or thoughts or questions for me or Denise.
I have a little story, JJ.
Okay, go ahead.
So I had a tenant in Oakland who couldn't pay rent for April. I gave her 50% off. I said, I can offer you 50% off now. She said, great. She took that. May rolls around, her unemployment's coming in. And unemployment checks have an additional $800 tacked onto it every 2 weeks, I think right now. It's $600 to $800 additional every 2 weeks. So come May, this month now, she says, oh, I can pay the whole thing. I'm okay now. So I say, great. And I decided just to waive that half month's rent and said, I'm glad to help you out and we're moving on. So that's interesting in that if there's EDD money flowing and if there's this extra federal money tacked onto it, rent should be easier for people to pay with job losses. So that'll be interesting to keep an eye on as well. I don't know how you verify it, or are you getting EDD? Have you received it? When did you receive it? How much are you getting? All that kind of stuff. But I thought that was a positive development.
Yeah, we're not going that far into the conversation with the tenants at this point. Everybody knows what unemployment is, and we're encouraging them to apply for it. But the trouble is that the bureaucracy is completely overwhelmed. And as I shared in previous calls, my conversations with another one of our tenants who ran out of benefits under unemployment at the end in the middle of March. He said, I can't get through. I know that I've heard that there's another 13 weeks extension onto my benefit, but I can't get through to anybody on EDD, and their website keeps crashing and nobody answers the phone.
Yeah.
And it's a difficult situation. So our position here at RMC is to continue to be very understanding and considerate and kind and supportive through this difficult time. And all we want is for the tenants to be as considerate with us in that regard. And we'll give them plenty of time. We'll work it out. We'll talk about any potential forgiveness later. If it has to be a part of a package deal, where we can get a stipulation for entry of judgment in exchange for a payment plan, we can do that. And then if they pay faster, we can forgive a little bit of it as an enticement to make it more worthwhile for them. But, you know, I think the deferrals are, they're, you know, worthwhile to just hang on to that and say, you know, don't worry about it right now. Stay where you are. Don't think about this right now. Think about taking care of everything you need, and we'll figure it out when we understand a little bit more about what reality is going to look like in the near future. So that's sort of our position right now.
AJ,
Yes.
it would seem to me that by the time we get to January, Superior Court's going to be like a three-ring circus, just trying to get in the door if we do have to file. And you probably won't see anything for 4 or 5 months from there. Just
Right.
getting.
But that's the way it always is anyway, isn't it?
So we're looking at a year out.
Well, that is absolutely true that we're looking at a year out. But, you know, before this all started, we were looking at 6 months to get anything through housing court anyway.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you can at least hang on to having something to collect as opposed to forgiving it now, I think we'd rather be in that position, and know that whatever you put into it then can be backed up with a stipulation and you might get the unit back. I mean, once again, I don't know what market rate is. I don't know what it's going to be a year from now. Who knows? Maybe our market, you know, takes a big dive. I'm not sure I necessarily see that, but you know, it's certainly possible. Maybe in other parts of California that we see a big decrease. I think San Francisco should hold on because there's such demand still. It's still a good place to live. Now, if all of the bars and restaurants are closed and not accessible, you know, that would be a problem.
If I also may address Joel's concern, I think that let's assume May 31st is the end of the order, just for sake of discussion, or we can assume it to be June 30th, God forbid, but June 30th. That doesn't mean that you can't enter into a stipulation. What it means is that you may not evict for non-payment of rent via an unlawful detainer complaint. After June 19th, the San Francisco Superior Court will allow the filing of UDs, which gives us the security that the tenants will repay. But of course, it begs the question, so 2 months they can't pay, you sit down, you make a deal, okay, I can definitely pay in November, no problem. You enter into a stipulation, and if they don't pay in November, they agree that they may be evicted December 1st. You can appreciate, however, that that assumes that they remain in possession through that date.
Right.
They can leave anytime they want. And then you have to change that to a judgment. So it's this situation that every single process is a little different. Do you trust the tenant? Where do they work? What kind of person are they? They could up and leave. And so there's a lot of unknowns.
Nobody ever gets an eviction in January or in December, Thanksgiving.
Correct. That's right. Unless they agree to it. And that's where you sit down with the tenant and say, what's the situation? And if they say, look, I'll definitely have the money on December the 1st, otherwise you can remove me. That's a document that they've signed.
Yeah.
And that's a document the court recognizes. And I'm not suggesting you do that, but that's an example of what you can do depending upon the circumstances. And you can do that as soon as after June 19th. Now that's an agreement.
Yeah.
The tenant may completely disregard you, and that's where you need to worry about evicting Joel.
Well, I see us as in a battle between us and the city. City doesn't want any more homeless people, and so they're going to be on the other side of the table, as they usually are, fighting with us over evictions. They don't want anybody being kicked out.
Are you getting a lot of these notices?
Not a ton. I mean, like I said, we have about 30 tenants who have asked for deferral, and we've gotten this specific notice twice, which is interesting. But you know, at this point, once again, I'm recommending that we sit on that deferral and understand that it won't be paid until next year. But preserve our ability to collect that rent in the future, because I'd rather have it, you know, next year than forgive it altogether right now. Now, if it comes to signing a stipulation in a couple of months that says the tenant will have it paid, and the tenant, you know, let them pick the number. Okay, well, I'll have it paid by next April.
That's
Fine.
right.
And I can put an incentive in there that says we'll give you a 10% reduction if you have it paid by January 1st or by February 1st. And I'll give you another 10% if it's paid by December 31st. You know, whatever it is, you pay it by the end of the year. We can work that out, but it's based on how much we trust the tenant and what their specific situation is. Because as Denise has said, we also put ourselves in a position where you sign this deferral agreement and they walk away from it in August. And they've already gotten the value, the free rent. And what do you have left to do except go collect on that judgment? But if we give away rent now, you know, I try not to think about giving it away just yet. But I'm also telling people we're not talking about how the deferral is going to be repaid or how much is going to be forgiven until after we get to a place where we understand what reality is going to look like for the foreseeable future. Because right now, we're just taking it day by day.
Well, if you reduce, isn't it true in San Francisco, if you reduce their rent, that would be their new rent?
No, actually, that is specifically outlined in the mayor's order. Denise just mentioned that any reductions are based on the economic conditions of and the hardship of the tenant, and it cannot be considered to be a new base rent based on these severe situations. The situation I think you're referring to, Barbara, is related to during a downturn when a tenant comes to you and says, well, I see that my neighbor upstairs just signed a lease and it's $300 less than mine, so I want a reduction in my rent. And if you reduce the rent in order to avoid the vacancy, the rent board's going to say, well, that's you adapting to market conditions, and therefore that's a permanent reduction.
Right.
And so that's been predicted as a potential sticking point and already put into the order that says that reductions and forgiveness or you know, forbearance at this time does not equal a long-term reduction in the rent, that we're going to be able to go back to the original rent.
Okay. All right. That's good.
Yes, definitely. But that is a good question.
JJ, Kirk Loveland, real quick.
Yep.
Remind me, we're at May 1. When do our tenants need to let us know if they're not going to be able to pay May rent? Would they have already had to let us know that, or do they have a certain number of days into the month?
They probably have already let us know that. I mean, the fact of the matter is anybody who didn't pay in April probably isn't going to be paying in May.
Sure.
And so, especially, you know, in your circumstance, your commercial tenants, their situation hasn't changed any. And so I'm not expecting anything from them until their businesses are allowed to be reopened. And actually, you know, I have another tenant with a bar and restaurant that has been very, very successful, who I've been working very constructively with, and they made an interesting suggestion that, you know, rent will be restructured. They've got 4 years left on a lease option from their original lease, which is 6 years old. And they said, you know, they'll restructure it and add the months on to the end of the lease, which, you know, we still have to work out some details. Like, is it going to be dollar for dollar or month for month? Because months 4 years from now have 12% in rent increases, 12+% with compounding in rent increases. So those months later on are going to be more than the months today. But, you know, they're also suggested to us that while they're not allowed to open, they don't have to pay any rent, which, you know, it makes perfect sense. And on top of that, they're anticipating that they're going to be mandated to keep the capacity down and operate under social distancing guidelines for, you know, months and months after this. And so where they'd normally have 60 or 70 people in the place, they might only be able to have 30. And if they're limited to half capacity, then they would pay a proportional share of the rent at that time. So, you know, it's an interesting suggestion. It takes into account the reality of the situation, which is, once again, this isn't anybody's fault. And, you know, in most circumstances, I think my clients are going to want to work with their tenants in that regard. If it's a good relationship with the tenant, and they feel like that's worth preserving in the long run. And in this circumstance, we definitely feel that way.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I'm obviously I'm assuming our, you know, in our building, our buildings, I'm assuming our commercial tenants are coming back for a little bit based on the type of business. So I get that.
Yeah.
I was more thinking about like the residential folks, knowing that you've had a doubling in the number of folks that are not paying month over month. I was just thinking, you know, if we haven't heard anything by now, is it safe to assume that those
No.
are still paying, or how? Like when would we know that by?
We'll know that. You know, well, what's going to happen is it's going to take me, you know, 5 or 6 days into the month. It'll take me until early to mid next week to look at my delinquency list. And then
Okay.
I reach out to the people who haven't paid and haven't asked for a deferment. And then, you know, that's why, you know, the next Wednesday is the 6th. And so by then, you know, I should be able to tell everybody and kind of give you a sense of how the market's doing by looking at that list and saying, well, I've got, you know, 12 or 15 or 2, you know, unexcused non-payments here.
Right.
Because now we have, you know, it's usually either you paid or you didn't. And if you didn't, it's because we're going to be serving a 3-day notice. And now it's you paid or you didn't, or you're asking for forbearance. And
Yeah, okay.
so it's a
I just didn't know if they
three-way.
needed. I didn't know if they needed to ask for forbearance by a particular time into the month. You know, the 10 days prior to when rent is due, or something like that. But it
No.
doesn't sound like it. Okay.
No,
Okay.
there's no particular timing, but you know, my approach this whole time has been to be proactive and ask people to let me know in advance so that I
Yeah.
know what to expect, as opposed to having to chase them. I just don't want to do that.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Thank you.
Sure.
And JJ, if I may, just the 12th supplement also now the order reflects the fact that the tenant does not need to ask for rent deferment.
Right.
So if they don't ask, there's no harm to the tenant when they say, oh, sorry, I forgot to pay rent, I can't.
Right.
You still have to give them deference, and there's no late penalties, and there's also no rent increases during the period that the order is in place.
Right.
All right.
But you don't waive them. You can use them in the future, but you can't do it right now.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Well, looking forward to next week's calls. I'll send out the email announcing them. Thank you again, Denise, for joining us today. It was great having you. I appreciate the clarity and expertise always. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. Remember, feel free, give me a call, send me an email, let me know if you have specific questions. I'm always happy to chat. Appreciate all of your joining us and being a part of the family here. And I hope everybody has a good weekend. Enjoy the weather and try to live in the moment, because it's all stressful and uncertain on a day-to-day basis. So thank you, everybody. It's great seeing you. Take care. Have a good weekend.
Thanks,
Thank
JJ.
you, JJ.
Thank you.
For this.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.